on today. Emergency evacuation, please.
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the illuminated green signs to the exit using either the marble staircase or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Brown's Restaurant. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Yes, apologies from Councillor Eleanor Jackson, and Councillor David Biddleston is substituting.
Welcome, Councillor Biddleston. Can I welcome the 4 students for actually watching the committee today. I'm sure they will be intrigued what goes on here, so I expect members to behave themselves. Declarations of interest, are any at all? None. Urgent business, there is no urgent business. Items of public statements, there are none. Minutes of the meeting for June 2025. Could I see someone move those accurate record? Councillor Horsall and Councillor Simon. All in favour, please? That's what everybody. Site visit list. There's only one site visit that took place, and that is also on the main plans list as well. So I'm going to hand over to Ben to actually introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still waiting for some technical.
When you're ready, okay?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll just move on to the item. Yep, so this is an application for 2 Mayfields, Keynsham. It follows on from an application we had last year, which was for so I'll just revert back a little bit just to give a bit of the history. So we've had planning permission was granted for a block of flats, for 4 flats on the site shown on the plan. There was a 2 later Section 73 applications that amended that scheme. The latter one, which we looked at in November last year, was a Section 73 application. That's to amend the plans list to add dormer windows to the front and back of the roof. That was approved by committee. Because it was a Section 73 application, it didn't allow for any change to the description of development, so the original description was for 4 flats, so they weren't able to put forward 2 flats in the roof space under that application, so the application solely concerned the dormer windows to the front and back. And we made clear on that particular permission with an informative that that permission was solely for the dormer windows, and that if should they wish to convert the roof space to flats, that would require a separate application, and that's this application that we have before us. The previous application also amended the parking provision, so it went from 2 to 3. So this shows the existing ground and first floor. So the building is not complete at the moment. It is substantially complete, but it's not to the stage of being occupied. So the proposal before us is not retrospective as such, because the development is not complete. It wouldn't be possible to occupy those units on in the roof space. So it is prospective rather than retrospective. So this is the plan of the flats in the roof space. In terms of space standards, we've had that checked, and it exceeds the national minimum space standards for a 1-bedroom, 1-person flat. That's for both of the units. Our policies don't specifically tie into the national space standards, but it is a useful guide for us. So in terms of the space, that they're entirely adequate for two one-bedroom flats. So it's the elevation of the building. I'll show you a photograph later on as built. The dormer windows, before, with the previous application, were dormer windows onto a void space. The dormer windows will now provide light to the two flats. The issue of amenity was discussed in the previous item that went to committee, and it was determined then that there was sufficient separation distance to surrounding properties to ensure that those dormer windows don't result in a harmful overlooking of neighbours, and we consider that remains the case. Yes, this shows a photograph of as it is at the moment, so substantially complete but not complete yet, and no occupation of any of the flats at the moment. The issues being raised by the parish council, town council and by neighbours primarily revolve around parking. This scheme provides 3 parking spaces, so that is, so if we look at the whole building, so that's 6 flats, that's 3 parking spaces for 6 flats. If we look at it in isolation, it's 1 parking space for two flats. But I think it's helpful just to consider overall what we're looking at. So it's 3 parking spaces for 6 flats. In terms of the parking standards, it meets the parking standards based on our policy. Because it's in a sustainable location, in a town, near a town centre, near public transport, near a railway station, etc., they have submitted an accessibility statement which allows for a reduction on the parking standards. So in this instance, the figure has come out, the accessibility statement allows for 75% to 100% reduction. So looking directly at the parking standards, it would be 2 spaces, but they're providing 1 space, which is a 50% reduction, which is a less reduction than they could do under the accessibility statement. And that's the same that occurred with the original proposal. It was 4 flats with 2 parking spaces, and they, based on an accessibility statement, the score from that allowed for 50% reduction. So originally it was 2 parking spaces for 4 units. We're now getting 3 parking spaces for 6 units. So it's entirely consistent with our policy, our parking standards and our transport and development SPD. So in our view, that there are no issues to raise in terms of the parking provision for this site. It's a particularly sustainable location. There are benefits to the scheme in terms of providing further housing in the district. We're all aware that the council doesn't have a 5-year housing land supply, so this will provide 2 extra dwellings for the council within a sustainable location. So just one point I'd like to add as a verbal update to members. I'd like to add in a condition requiring the 3 parking spaces to be provided prior to occupation of any of the flats proposed by this scheme. So I'd just like to seek delegated authority to put the specific wording for that condition together and add that to the decision notice. Otherwise, that concludes my presentation.
Okay, there's no public at all available and no statement from public. If members have questions, Councillor Horsfall.
Thank you. I've just got 2 questions. Is there any requirement to provide cycle parking on the site, first of all?
Yeah, so there is a requirement to provide cycle parking, and that is shown, so it's shown on the floor plan. So they're adding 2 extra cycle parking spaces at the back to account for the 2 extra units, and there is a condition required on the application to require extra details of that and for it to be provided prior to occupation. So, yeah, 2 extra cycle parking spaces will be provided.
Thank you. Second question, if I may, Chair. Just regarding the dormers, obviously the committee did consider the dormer windows before, but they were approved on the basis of aesthetics. They were never intended to be used as part of any habitable space. But just to confirm, you're satisfied that there will be no overlooking issues as a consequence of those dormer windows being installed and occupied?
Yes, I'm entirely satisfied there won't be any harmful overlooking from those windows. There's sufficient separation distance to neighbouring properties. The properties at the rear are scout huts, so they're not residential properties at the rear, and for the other properties there's adequate separation distance.
Councillor Gawley.
Yeah, this is right next door to a really big car park, isn't it? So I'm just wondering if there's a way that, if Keynsham Town Council is so worried about parking, is there a way that spaces could be reserved in the car park for these residents, or is that not would that create a precedent?
I don't think that's an item that could be considered on this case because it complies with the parking standards. There aren't really any grounds to require further or additional parking beyond that. And the parking standards have got a maximum parking standards, and they could have potentially reduced it down less than what they have done based on the accessibility statement. So with providing 3 spaces, and we can condition that to ensure they're provided, that it's fully compliant with our policy. There are no grounds really to require any additional parking.
Councillor McPhee.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch your last point that you made about the 3 parking spaces at the end.
Yep, so their accessibility statement allows a 75% to 100% discount on the parking provision.
Right.
So looking at the standards directly, it's 2 parking spaces.
Right.
So potentially based on the accessibility statement, they could reduce that to
It
0,
could be
but they're
2. Right.
0, but they've reduced that to 1. So
Okay.
they've done a 50% reduction.
Right.
But overall, you're getting a 50% provision for the entire site because it's 3 spaces for 6 flats.
Okay.
Councillor Bilston.
Thank you. Although I absolutely accept that it isn't your purview necessarily about parking in the car park, I think it would be helpful for us to know whether the residents there or future residents are able to access the car park and can they request allocated parking provision. It's just something I don't know the answer to. Forgive me.
I don't think it's a relevant matter for this application. That would be a matter for parking services, property services. There isn't any grounds under this application to require that to be looked into or secured. But in terms of the actual legality or the provision of that would be a sort of separate matter to discuss with if the residents to discuss with parking services to see whether that was possible. I imagine it probably isn't possible.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I'm still trying to get my head round this application when I'm comparing it to the application we looked at in November last year. So last year we had a retrospective application for this, and within that application, one of the retrospective aspects was the fact they'd put in these dormer windows without permission. My recollection is that the conclusion we came to was that although we wouldn't ask them to remove the dormer windows, that the roof space would remain void to avoid an overdevelopment of the site. And that's certainly how I envisaged that the application last time, was that the roof space was to remain void. We now have an application to fill that with 2 flats. How do we square that with what was decided by the committee in November?
Yeah, so that is correct. So the previous application was a Section 73 application to amend the previous Section 73. So if we think of it as an application to amend the live planning permission on the site, so under that process you can make changes to the scheme, but you can't make changes that change the approved description of development. So in the description of development of the live application or the valid application, that existed on the site. That was for four flats. So under a section 73, which is the application to amend the plans list, you can't change the description. So it wasn't possible under that previous application for them to put forward provision of two flats. They could only put forward the dormer windows. In actual fact, the applications that originally came in, they did describe it as provision of 2 flats and dormer windows, but we went back to them and explained to them that's not possible. You can't do that amendment under section 73. That requires an entirely fresh application. So they withdrew that part and just focused it on the dormer windows onto a void space. That was approved. They've now come back in with a standalone separate application solely for 2 flats within the roof space. So we have to consider that application that's in front of us. But you're correct in terms of the previous application that allowed for dormer windows onto a void space, and we even put an informative on just to make it clear to the applicants that all that was being granted on that application was the dormer windows, not provision of any additional flats.
But we could have, on that previous one, asked them to remove the dormers, and we decided to save them costs that we wouldn't. And now we're faced now with potential overdevelopment with 2 extra flats.
Councillor Simon?
That's not quite my recollection of the meeting. I think we agreed the dormers on the technicality, if you like, that they wouldn't permit the flats, but we wouldn't, I think, have agreed to dormers if we didn't think that the flats would come forward as they have in this way. So I think it was implicit that we would consider with an open mind these flats and our previous decision didn't put any bar on our consideration.
We're moving into a debate here rather than questions to officers.
Okay. Please, yes. Sarah.
Just to clarify the position, we mustn't get too concerned about what was implicit in previous decisions and what we might have considered. Previously, there was an application for dormer windows, and that was permitted. There was no application at the time to consider whether that would be occupied in any other way. And we couldn't have preempted the outcome of an application to occupy that void space, because that wasn't before us at the time. So the dormer windows were found to be acceptable and permitted. We now have a development that has dormer windows, and there's a freestanding application now to convert that void space into flats, and we must just consider that application and not be too concerned about what went before. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there's no more questions. Open for debate. Can I look for a motion on the floor, please? Councillor McPhee.
So, I'm dealing, as you say, with what we have now and leaving out the historical. What we can say is that this is the ultimate sustainable location. You've got buses going to Bristol, to Bath, to Midsummer Norton or Southmead in the other directions. So, and you've got a station within about 400 yards. So this is an incredibly sustainable location, and not having a car here is going to be a minimal, considering you to work anyway. We also have a shortage of one-room apartments in Keynsham as well as in Baines. And so, listening to this, I really don't feel that I can see anything to refuse, and I would like to put a motion to support the officer.
Does that include the actual additional words moved by the officer?
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Gawley.
I agree with Councillor McPhee, and I think actually this development has been put in very sensitively within the surrounding area. It's an attractive building. They've tried hard to mirror other buildings in the area. The fact that it's a couple of one-bedroom flats is very attractive for younger people, possibly, and we need to provide those. So I think it's a great initiative, and the fact that you can get transport from everywhere, I think is a really good thing. So I would be very much in favour of it.
Councillor Horsell?
Thank you, Chair. I think when the dormer windows were considered at the last committee, I think we all realised that eventually we would see a full application to provide 2 flats in the void space. So we're not here to question the motives of the applicants doorstepping or coming into this through the back door. The fact of the matter is, I agree with Councillor McPhee and Councillor Gawley. It's a highly sustainable location. It doesn't require parking, but there are going to be parking spaces provided and cycle spaces. I don't feel it's an overdevelopment. I think it's an asset to have one-bedroom apartments because they will be affordable and they will cater for that market. So again, I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, I probably disagree with a lot of the comments being made. I think that the building isn't proportionate to or in keeping with the rest of the street, but it exists now. I'm surprised it's there in the first place, but it is now there. So, and policy doesn't permit us to do anything else other than really permit this. But I'm quite disappointed with the size and character of it. I think it doesn't fit in at all well in that road. But I don't think we've got any other options.
Any further speakers? Okay, there's no further speakers on a motion moved by Councillor McPhee, seconded by Councillor Gawley to permit. Those in favour? 10 in favour. Any against? That's unanimous, thank you. Appeals reports, that is in front of you for any questions anybody may have. Nobody, that's for noting them. And the date of the next meeting will be on the 30th of July, starting at 10 AM, a new starting time for you. We'll look to finish by 12:30. If not, we'll take a break at 12:30 and then resume until we finish. But we're going to try and clear these up in the morning now if we possibly can. Councillor Hall, should you comment?
Just as a point of order, was there any consultation on that change of time, or is this
I have spoken to everybody in the room, Bertie, and everybody else agrees that issue. Okay? Yes, you lost that, Ian, so I'm afraid. Any site visits will take place on 21st July.